Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Leyli Seyfi. I'm an associate professor at the University of Birjan, Iran, and currently serving on IFLA library service to the multicultural population section. On behalf of the library services to the multicultural population section and the Middle East and North Africa Regional Division, I welcome you all. I would like to thank IFLA headquarters for their support and for providing the Zoom platform, especially Megan Price and Walid Al-Badi for their continuous support in coordinating this webinar. A few Zoom housekeeping details to keep today's event running smoothly. Comments are welcome in the chat box at any time. And this webinar is in English and you will receive the recording after the webinar. We will have our Q&A at the end of the webinar, and please put your questions regarding the webinar in a chat in a Q&A box itself. Today's webinar is about preserving and curating family archives by Mark Muehlhausler, Director, Center of Excellence for the Middle East and Arab Culture, the American University in Cairo. Mark is an academic librarian at the American Library in Cairo School of Libraries and Learning Technologies. His work focuses on collection development for Middle East studies and on fostering scholarly and creative engagement with the American University in Cairo outstanding collections of unique materials. So with this brief intro, I would like to invite Mark, our respected speaker, to present his webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this webinar. Mark, please. Mark? So it seems, yes, Mark is here. Mark, please, floor is yours. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yes, yes. Please. I did my introduction, so please, floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Muehlhausler from AUC. I would like to apologize to begin with. I have problems with my camera, so I'm afraid I won't be able to switch it on. But anyway, I think I'll be focusing on slides in this presentation anyway. So first of all, I'd like to thank IFLA for hosting me today, and particularly Walid Al-Badi, the Library Director of Majlis al-Man Library and Vice Chair of IFLA MENA RDC, and his colleague Leyli Seyfi. I'd also like to thank my colleague Nermin Refat here in Egypt, who's the information coordinator at the MENA Regional Division Committee. For the program today, on the next slide, I'd like to first provide a little bit of background by myself. And I wonder if we could please share the slides, Walid. Excuse me, Walid, are you there?
Walid, please share the slides.
Right, if there's a technical issue, I can also share them from my end. That
Yeah,
shouldn't be an
please
issue.
share. Once I'm just communicating with Valid.
Okay, no problem at all. So let's just get started here. And where are we? So let's start the slideshow then. So the program for today, I'm sorry about that hang up. So I'd like to give some background, both about AUC, where I work, and about myself. I'd like to make a few general points, but in order not to make it too theoretical and dry, I'd really like to focus on a couple of case studies, sharing some experiences of curating and preserving family archives here in Egypt, and focus particularly on the local linguistic and general context. And the ones I've listed here, the Nega Mitsubishi archive and Wikidata Behena archives, are both archives that we've acquired at AC Libraries fairly recently. I do hope that we have a little bit of time at the end if you have any questions. But of course, if there's anything that immediately pops to your mind that you want to ask right away, do feel free to pop them into the chat. But because I've got the slides open, I'd be really appreciative if either Walid or Layli could alert me if there are any questions coming in. Okay. So, before we start, perhaps can I ask you to share something about your professional roles in the chat so that I know who it is that I'm talking to? I'm just curious, like kind of roles you play, whether you're curators, whether you're metadata catalogers, archivists, perhaps technologists, digitization experts. Perhaps you could put something into the chat and just tell me a little bit about yourself. So, curator of rare books, graduate student in the US. Right, anyone else? Well, I expect that we'll have a fairly mixed group in here. So let's just press on. And let me talk a little bit about my home institution, the American University in Cairo. So what does it do that? So the American University in Cairo was established in 1919. So it's a fairly old university. It's been around just over 100 years. And it's an American institution that was set up as a Protestant and very missionary type of institution initially. But that changed very quickly. And we've become a regular liberal arts college now in based in Egypt. Of course, we're a foreign institution. We're an American institution. That means we're English language. We're also private. And I think I'll come back later to how that halts us sometimes and how that influences some of the things that we do. But for now, let it be said that as a private institution, of course, we have sort of established ourselves as an institution within Egypt. And we've developed over time a fairly close relationship with a particular demographic in Egyptian society. Of course, being private and fee-paying a demographic that is sort of rather well-to-do and can afford the fees at an American institution. About myself, also, I am not an archivist, that's a disclaimer. I'm actually a specialist in Oriental languages. I did a degree in Arabic and Semitic languages. I slipped into librarianship and worked my way through almost every library function there is. So I started off as a cataloger, I went on to be a manuscript curator, a manuscript cataloger, and then on to collection development librarian, serials librarian, copyright and licensing. You name it, I've done a bit of that. And in my current role, of course, I'm a Middle East librarian, so I do a lot of sort of subject specialists and curatorial work. But I work very closely with all my colleagues, both in the Rare Books Library, but also in the Digitization Center on digital projects. And one of my ongoing big projects is that I'm the editor of the institutional repository. So I wear a variety of hats. But my main hat is, of course, that of the curator for the Middle East collections. And in that function, my role is really to enable research. So I see myself as the person who helps others excel, who provides the groundwork on which others build their research. And really the best day that I have is if I can insert one of our fantastic collections into someone's research in a great way, or stimulate some kind of scholarly or creative engagement with our collections. So, as promised, some general points. You could also call them propositions, if you will. And as I said, I'm not an archivist. I don't claim to have any sort of great theoretical insights, but these are just a few things that, in my personal experience, I think are probably true about what I do. So I have found over the past few years, I've been at AUC since 2013, that social interaction is really a crucial component of collection development, and particularly in Egypt. If we talk about the local context, I already mentioned that we have been embedded in Egypt for over 100 years, and over that time, we have developed a close relationship with a large demographic. Now, I think it's an American tradition to do this kind of follow-up and this engagement with alumni and with donors and so on and so forth. And that has served us rather well in Egypt. We do rely on these social networks quite extensively when we reach out to identify potential project partners, potential donors, and so on and so forth. And so these social interactions are ongoing. They're also important, particularly in the local setting, because Cairo is rather remarkable as a city because it has an enormously developed network of book vendors and dealers, but at a very sort of invisible level. There was a paper that was published not too long ago, which sort of analyzed the entire sort of ecosystem, if you will, of these book dealers. But the long and the short of it is that there's an enormously well-developed and branching system where every scrap of paper, every kind of personal possession that may come out of a dissolved household is being assessed, divided into piles, is being transformed through various networks and of different people who cater towards different constituencies. And a lot of these transactions happen outside a shop. They happen through social interactions. You happen to know someone, or someone happens to know that you're interested in a particular type of content and will contact you if something comes up on the market. It's that kind of being in the know, that kind of social network that I think is really quite distinctive, particularly of the environment of Cairo. The second proposition is language is a limiting factor. As already noted, AUC is an English language and American institution, and we do sometimes find that language can stand in our way. All our processes, business processes, are in English, for example. All our communications are by default in English. We have very few communications that go out in English and in Arabic. And that of course, limits our reach and our access somewhat, except, of course, that a particular demographic of society is fluent in English and will see these messages. But I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that there is a certain part of the Egyptian audience which you don't serve awfully well and don't necessarily reach if we only rely on English. And the third proposition is that foreign private institutions have some privileges, and some is italicized here. So some of the privileges are that, of course, we have specialized staff, very highly qualified staff, like conservationists, metadata specialists, curators, and so on and so forth, to take care of collections in the library. We also have certain access to quality materials for preservation and so on and so forth. We have a certain leeway in designing our own policies and our own priorities, where we are flexible and can adapt to circumstances. So those are some of the privileges, I think, which we enjoy. But on the other hand, being foreign and being private also has some drawbacks. The first one is that we're often seen as very elitist and that we're not necessarily seen as very open. And that is not something that works in our favor necessarily when we come to talk about family archives in particular, where families may be interested in creating access, perpetuating such as memory and so on and so forth. It's a double-edged sword. And likewise, we don't necessarily have a lot of freedom in engaging with other different institutions because the setup is very different. We find it very, very complex to navigate those systems, or to find like a common ground for common digitization projects, for example. We do regularly have people from Egyptian institutions who come to visit us, who participate in events and so forth, but institutional level cooperations within the library are very often rather complex. So we may work in parallel, and I'll share an example of that in a short while. But shared projects are the exception rather than the rule, unless we have special support that comes through levels higher up than us librarians. So I wanted to jump in and first define what we're talking about when we talk about family archives. And I'm sharing a slide here which may look familiar to some of you, the kind of stuff that you get. It's usually an unordered mass of something, and it can be all kinds of things. It can be a very orderly collection of materials in a very, very clean environment that's relatively accessible, or it could be an entire apartment full of stuff covered by a layer of dust and everything in between. So the term family archive, we conceive of it first before its reception into the library as a rather a broad term. But I think what they all have in common is that there's something that stitches them together. There's some kind of history that they express, or there's some kind of meaning that is greater than the meaning of its individual parts that is conveyed by a family archive. And I think that's an important bit, and it's one that I think we have to try and take care to preserve. I actually just slide here at one point, and just to keep you interested and also to learn something myself. I was just curious, what is the weirdest or most interesting item which you have ever found in family archive that you acquired? If you could put that into the chat, I would be quite curious. The most interesting or wacky item that you found in a family archive that you acquired, or in a collection that you've worked with. While you do that, I'll share what mine is. I've been in this role for quite a while, and I've been in libraries for quite a few years, but I think one of the most remarkable items that I ever found in the family collection was when I very first started my first year in the Bodleian Library. We received a donation from the family of an Ottoman poet. It contained a leather pouch, and the leather pouch held two things. It held a diamond-encrusted ornament, and it held a ball of hair. And there was a note explaining that this was the moustache of the poet whose archive we were acquiring. So there we go. That's the most interesting item that I've come across in my career so far. Any of the interesting things on your part? Fast food wrappers with poetry on. Okay, that sounds good. Oh, why is it stop sharing? Okay. Handwritten Quran, letter from grandma, food wrappers. Anything else? Okay, so that sort of brings us to one of the case studies here, the Nagah al-Bijbishi archive, which we acquired in 2022. And I'll sort of try to refer back to the propositions that I made at the beginning as I took through this one. So this was a collection that came to us, and it's a little illustration of that sort of social network that I mentioned. One of the the daughters of the family was actually an active student at AUC when this came. The mother was an alumna. And so there was a kind of contact between us and the family prior to this arising. Naguib al-Bishbishi was a lawyer in Mansoura in the Egyptian Delta. And he was an avid newspaper reader and a collector of newspapers for all of his life. And he lived a long life and passed away in 2021. And he left 3 apartments full of newspapers and books and other materials. So this was something that I was sent to inspect. And what I found is illustrated in these photographs here. On the top left, you see the door of the apartment, which was barely open because of piles of newspapers. And when I first met the family, they told me that the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, so the large library in Alexandria, had actually made the first pass of this collection. That's an example of what I referred to earlier, where we work in parallel with government institutions. So Bibliotheca Alexandrina is a major player in Egypt, in the Egyptian library scene. They're extremely professional. They do a lot of great stuff. And a lot of what they do, we work in parallel with. So this was a perfect example of it. So they had come in before, they had taken a lot of books from this collection, and so what was left over was still an awful lot. But the interesting thing was that when I arrived, their family members were present. So both the donor herself and her sister, both of who were in Mansoura at the time. And they asked whether they want to get started surveying the material. But it was pretty clear that the family was very sort of emotionally tied up with this collection from the way in which they presented it. So we actually took the decision to step back first and say, okay, perhaps we can have a conversation first about what it is that we're seeing here. Perhaps you can explain to us what this collection is and how it came about. I think that was a very good decision to take that approach of having a social interaction first, because it really helped in framing the collection as a whole. So we got the entire backstory of how their father was this very avid reader, how his father had been, and how he in turn encouraged his daughters to read and to also to excel in their particular lines of work. And from there, the conversation continued. I think it was a very, very good thing and a very worthwhile thing. And you can even see here on the bottom right that the donors themselves are very hands-on in packing up the material, making sure that it gets to the destination all right, and followed up on a regular basis. And I think that was a very valuable lesson for us to learn, that this regular follow-up was very important to them. This family in particular, because they had very, so I would say, emotional ties to the content. And in fact, it's something that we try to bear in mind and try to document as well. So we do have an information booklet for potential donors, which we tries to frame this entire process of giving family content to the library as a conversation. And so we try to encourage these conversations to happen before they even reach out to us. So a particular question about what would you like to donate and what do you want to keep? Who owns the material? I mean, that's an important question also in the Egyptian context. We have families are often very large. Who takes the lead in making a decision that something should go to the library? What rights do the individuals in the family have to it? And also, I mean, what is worth preserving in the library, what can be preserved at home? And these are all questions that I think are useful. And I'm putting the link down here to this document, this donation booklet, which may be interesting for you. So you can take a look at what there is. So particularly with the Bishbishi collection, so this conversation about what they would like to donate really developed rather nicely. So initially they had envisaged that they wanted to give away the books and the journals. They hadn't really even thought about that other types of content might be of interest, might be worth preserving. So like photo albums relating to the donor, to the father of the donor, school books, exercise books, sort of local documents. And it was actually rather interesting as we sort of talked about what we do, and we brought the donors in prior to the transfer of the material to show them the library and show them the range of materials which we preserve. I think that was like an aha moment for them to say, oh, there's other stuff which we could actually hand over and other stuff that we could preserve. One example of that is that they decided in the end to give the exercise books and school books to us because we already had a core of that in the library, and it added actually rather nicely and became an exhibit later on. So we made an exhibit out of it and actually designed a community event around those school day ephemera, where their particular family archive donation took center stage. And I think it was good for them to see that it was valuable, it was useful, it was somehow something that people can get value out as well, where they hadn't even considered it initially as being something that is of intellectual value. Working with families, of course, also means you put things down in writing just to make expectations clear. And what's not in the donation booklet are the terms of agreement. But of course, we share these with the donors well ahead of time and try to make sure that they understand what it is that that we need to do. And here again, this is one of the items that shows the limitations of language, because this document is available by default only in Arabic, in English, I'm sorry. And the English, of course, would be like the legal basis. We can provide an Arabic translation sort of ad hoc, but it's not what we get from the council's office initially. It's the English that counts, and that makes translating these terms into lay language a little bit more difficult, and reduces our ability to interact with donors in a sort of relaxed manner. But you can see also that these terms, of course, speak to our library needs. We have to do certain things because of our institutional setup, because of what we do, and what our procedures are, and our workflows like insurance and accountability and so on and so forth. That said, these terms are not necessarily set in stone. We can sometimes try to accommodate donors' wishes, but here too we're somewhat limited by resources. So, for example, we can't guarantee that a particular collection is going to be processed within a given period of time, just simply because we don't have the resources. We don't have enough catalogers, we don't have enough curators to do the work. But if it's particularly if it's a large donation, we also can't guarantee that we name a room after someone. So we don't have enough rooms to name them each after a donation. So there's some limits to what we can do, but of course we do try to accommodate. And the donor's wish in this particular case was that the sticker be fixed to the boxes in which material was kept, and we felt that was a very reasonable request. And the donor even provided the stickers themselves with their design. And I think that was something that we were very happy respecting and very happy accommodating to. The other bit, of course, is rights. I referred earlier to the idea that there may be rights issues about who owns material and what material they can give. So we have to make very clear also what we want to do with the stuff. And ideally, we want to make sure that we can also assure future use of the collection with a given set of rights. It's not often possible, though. And here too, we have certain limitations to what we can do. We can't, of course, conduct a sort of legal inquiry as to whether someone really has inherited the full rights to a particular set of content. That is really beyond the scope of what we can do. But wherever we can, we do try to secure as clear a set of rights as we can. I'm going to show you an image here, which could have come from the Specie Archive, but doesn't, because I was looking for an image that has annotation on the front. As you can see, this is an image that could conceivably have come from a family collection. Now, I wonder if you could tell me how you would describe this image. Can some of you volunteer and put into the chat some terms to describe this photograph? In case you don't see it, at the bottom left, it says Qadri Mahmoud. And then it says at Gezira Club. And on the right, it says King Farouk. So what type of descriptors would you use if you want to describe this image? Well, obviously, you'd add the personal names, right? Yes, I can see from Nermin subject headings like sports championship, indeed. We could even add the geographic coordinates. We know exactly where the swimming pool is at Gezira Club. That's a very known geographic location. We can even infer a relatively close date to this one. King Farouk ascended the throne in 1936 and had to abdicate in 1952. Here, he's a very, very young man. I would guess this must have been during the first 5 years of his reign. So I don't think this image would be later than 1940, probably some time earlier even. So 1936 to 1940 is probably a reasonable time bracket here. Right. No one's put anything in chat, but what I wanted to show here is that we probably take for granted, because we speak English right now, that any descriptors would be in English, right? And that's one of the big limitations that we have in our present setup. Again, language is this limiting factor, where just because we adopt certain library standards, like Library of Congress subject headings, MARC cataloging, and so on, so forth, the authority files that we use, they really are biased towards Romanization, Latin script representation of data and so forth. And we have to be really conscious about who we're serving here. And it's one of the big limitations that we're terribly mindful of. I know for a fact from statistics that in our institutional repository, a very large proportion of the traffic comes from within Egypt, despite the fact that most of the content is in English. The same is probably true for the digital library, although I don't have the precise figures for the digital library. So my guess is that the digital content and the analog content that we have in the library is mostly used or useful for researchers within Egypt or researchers who are interested in Egypt. And yet it has to be accessed by this detour of English, which is very often very unintuitive. Naguib Mahfouz is probably the easiest one, but there are lots of names that are really terribly unintuitive, even though they may be systematic. So the Getty Thesaurus, for example, place names will use Jardin City in romanization for Garden City. Well, no one's ever going to search for that string whatsoever. Likewise, Heliopolis for Masr Gedida is something that may not necessarily occur to every user initially. So there are all these kind of considerations. We have tried in recent years to be much more consistent about adding metadata. And if you open the metadata in our digital library for any recent photographic collections, for example, you will find that my colleagues are adding Arabic strings more and more, both for place names, for personal names, but also for subject strings. Now, some of this is obviously going to be mediated in future by different search techniques. We're already seeing that we're moving away from keyword searching and string matching in our databases to natural language searching and AI tools for search, which really change the game in terms of multilingual access because the concepts are no longer necessarily represented as strings of characters, but as represented in a vector space. So it's quite different as an approach, but we're not there yet. And of course, in future, any kind of AI system will also have to draw on metadata that was previously created. And since we're moving on in time, let me also move on to another example of a private collection, family collection that we've acquired very recently, nearly this year. It's the Behna Archive in Alexandria. And these are actually pictures of it. Now, I would like to tell you a story. Rashid Behna was a businessman. He was Syrian Orthodox and migrated to Egypt at the very end of the 19th century and settled in Alexandria. His family were very, very poor. And I am told that they were employed as sweeps in a cigarette factory. They were not paid, but were allowed to keep the sweeps as their pay. From these sweeps, they filtered out the little piece of tobacco, which they then mixed with honey and sold as ma'assil for the water pipe. With that, they became rather wealthy. When they had acquired enough capital, they moved into the business of trading with silk and then acquired large pieces of land and also moved into the film business. Not only did they bankroll the production of some films, they also were responsible for the distribution of virtually all Egyptian movies in the 1930s and 40s and the movement of the film reels back and forth between the distribution center and the cinemas everywhere. And in the course of these years, they accumulated a vast archive of private letters, of which you see an example here. And if you just make out the first underlined name, you can see Joseph Mizrahi, which may ring a bell to some of the Egyptians here. Have you ever heard of Togo Mizrahi, the very famous Egyptian film director? Ah, well, his father, Joseph Mizrahi, didn't trust his son, who was a spendthrift, apparently, and so he engaged Rashid Behna to bankroll the production of Togo Mizrahi's film, just to keep a tab on the expenses. And this is a letter between Rashid Behna or his son and his brothers in Alexandria, because they had branches in Cairo and Alexandria, back and forth, about the business conducted with Joseph Mizrahi. So, interesting, all that I've told you just now is oral law. It does not proceed from the content whatsoever. And it sort of highlights the role of oral histories as well. And we have a very solid oral history program, which my colleague and director of the Rare Books and Special Collections Library, Steve Urgula, has run for many, many years and still does. And I think it just shows that there has to be something in addition to keep that memory alive, because these are fantastic stories that contextualize the content incredibly. Now, we were called in to take care of part of the archive. And you can quibble with whether this is a family archive or not. I mean, it's not a family archive in the sense that it records private dealings, but it is a family archive in the sense that it records activities of many members of a large family in business over time. And these are sort of letters between these various families. And we, transferred a lot of these documents. I'm just showing you a short snippet. In fact, we have 486 of these folders sitting in storage. Now, as you can imagine, this pushes the boundaries of what we can do. Any library that has to accession this type of material needs to go through a process of cleaning, stabilizing the content, housing it in archival boxes, creating metadata, making it accessible therewith. It's a huge process, as I'm sure you all are aware, and a collection of this size really pushes limits somewhat. The bit that I'm particularly interested in is, of course, the metadata creation, because in the past, the creations which you've accessioned very often have metadata at a very sort of high level, collection level or folder or box level, but not necessarily at a more granular level. And this too, I think, is beginning to change slowly. So we regularly have groups of computer science students who do internships in the library, and this summer was no exception. We hosted a group of CS students who are charged with creating kind of AI process to investigate these documents from the Behna collection to create a kind of beta test to see what can be done. And I'm sharing the GitHub link here if you're interested. And if you want, I can stick that into, I'll stick it into the chat later on when we are doing Q&A. Okay, thank you. So this group was actually rather successful in creating this process whereby the digital image would be uploaded and a structured JSON file was done by AI, which not only was able to extract the text, handwritten French text of the letters with a certain degree of detail, but also extract entities like persons, companies, commercial entities, commodities, dates, and so on and so forth. The team then also tried to create some kind of visualization of what they had found in terms of commodity prices and how they developed over a relatively small sample. So I have to stress that this is all like a beta test just to see what can be done, and it's not really moved to production yet. But all I'm saying is that it can be that AI will be an enabler in really dealing with these collections and making it possible to ingest and be more efficient in dealing with these large collections. And with that, I am at the end of this presentation, as I've put it out there, and I'd like to encourage some questions if you're so inclined.
So thank you so much, Mark, for this wonderful presentation and very informative presentation. It was really interesting, especially when it comes to the family archives. That was wonderful initiatives. Thank you so much. I personally learned a lot. So now we are open for Q&A. Please type your question in chat box or in Q&A box, so we can take the questions and Mark can answer to your questions. If any question. So since there is no question for now, I just want to take the opportunity and ask my question. Mark, I would like to know, because you mentioned about the language barrier in preserving and curating this family archive, because here in Iran also, like for cultural heritage, especially for manuscript, we are having like most of them in Persian or in Arabic. So for that also, especially for metadata, we are having issue. I know you mentioned like you are having some barriers. I just want to know like with Arabic, what kind of like if you could solve the issue or any kind of OCR or any solutions. Could you please explain a bit more about this language issue?
Right. Of course, Arabic still presents some readability issues sometimes. I noted that for particularly the MENA archives, it includes both documents in French and in Arabic, and very little English. And the output that we get using the available open AI models for French is excellent. We get a very, very high degree of accuracy. Whereas for Arabic, the accuracy varies very much depending on both the quality of the image, obviously, but even if you do image pre-processing, the text gets extracted is often not as good as comparable text in French. This may just be a function of the underlying training data, like how good models are. I do expect that AI models will develop in future, but right as where we are at this point in time, Arabic is really not as well served as other languages, probably. And of course, there are minority languages too. I mean, I did not mention this, but AUC has enjoyed long and close relationships with the Armenian community here in Egypt, and we don't have any Armenian catalogers. We have an Armenian colleague in the library, but that would be an example of a language that might be very difficult to deal with, and some of you may be familiar with. Likewise, for Coptic, we did receive a donation of Coptic material at one point, which was curated by the person who, like, the family member of the family who donated it. And here too, I mean, the lack of language specialists creates difficulties sometimes.
That's true. Thank you so much. We have a question from Osama. From your experience, how to integrate these family archives in the research and academic life?
Right. Ah, nice, actually. So, as I mentioned, we try to keep the relationship with the donor going, and I think it's really important to try and prove to families who donate their material to the library that their material is useful, that it's used in research, and that there is something that can be gotten out of it. So I already mentioned earlier the exhibit that we did with some of the school material which we received as part of a exhibit under the title School Days. In addition to that exhibit, we also held a workshop for community members where we invited a senior citizens organization. So this is a social organization that tries to create social events for senior citizens. Totally unrelated to AUC, but we know of them. We were in contact with them. So invited them to come in and to engage not only with the exhibit, but also to similar materials. So we encouraged them to bring in material that was of a similar kind, stuff related to school days. And the idea here was to sensitize people to the idea that, you know, your mundane everyday stuff can be of historical interest, of historical importance. So it fulfilled that purpose. But the other purpose was to show the participants how to take care of the stuff themselves, because very often, you know, if stuff is put into a shoebox and left under the bed, it's not an ideal kind of preservation environment, right? So we're trying to share with them simple means of preserving their own family heritage, at least for a while, just with clear plastic folders, a nice archival box or a box that holds the material well, and also encouraging practices like annotating photographs to show who the people are in these pictures, so that the memory is not forgotten. Now, that's of course not about research and academic life. That's probably the flip side, rather. How do we try to integrate academic material into community life? But I think that's important too. So talking about research and academic life, we do encourage our community members, our faculty members, and our teaching staff to bring in their classes to the Rare Books and Special Collections Library on a regular basis. So it's one thing that we do very, very frequently. So my colleagues up there on the third floor do this like almost on a daily basis. They bring in classes of graduate students, undergraduate students, and very often they're tasked to do something with the material that we have, including the family archives. So they would be given a task, for example, in the arts department to write, to create a project around typefaces or graphic designs in old newspapers. And that was actually something that was done with that newspaper collection from Al Mansoura, where students went in and looked at how did particular Arabic fonts develop over time since the 1930s up until the 1980s. And it was an interesting project for the graphic arts part. Similarly, for the history department or for the political science department, or for like the biology department, they might be interested in some of the stuff we have, because we have so many different types of materials that can be used for academic engagement. But we're particularly keen on that engagement with the students.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. Another question from Ali. How can digital preservation help ensure long-term access to family memories?
I am not the expert on digital preservation, I can tell you. And it's a huge and complicated process. And I don't even have the full details for our institution. But what I can tell you is that the problem with digitalization in general is, of course, digital storage. Everyone here, I think, has to grapple with that reality at one point, that digitizing is just the easy part. Then storing it and keeping it is the more difficult part. So we're constantly running up against the ceiling of the terabytes and terabytes that we've already been allotted. I have to ask for more, and it needs funding, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's complicated, is the short answer.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one more question.
Thank you.
I'm just taking the opportunity. Uh, how you are dealing with the donors? Because, or maybe let's ask like this way, if you are doing kind of works for identifying these donors for family archives, or just like in terms of like, for example, because I don't know how is intellectual property right for this family archives, and if they are really willing to donor to the libraries or archives.
Are you asking how do we find people?
Yes,
Or how do
yes.
we convince them?
Both, both.
Right. Um, as I said, I think it has to do a lot with social networks, and I think that is really like the key for our setup within Egypt, and having been around for so long, that we have these established channels within sort of a particular demographic of Egyptian society. We have a reputation. So at one level, it's reputation management. We're trying to convey out there that we are people who are taking good care of things, that we also make it visible, make them accessible as much as we can, and that we are trusted partners. I think ultimately it's about trust also, right? You want to give the donors the feeling that we're not there to hit and run. We're there to, engage in a long-term kind of relationship, if you will, that doesn't sort of stop with a transfer of material. No, I mean the transfer of the material should really be just part of a longer process where they've been invited later on to a public event, and so on and so forth. And here again, the example of the Bishbishi collection, we organized a workshop centered around newspapers. And it wasn't necessarily for the Bishbishi, it was just something that the history department had been interested in. But it so happened that this particular material came partly from the Bishbishi collection. So we actually invited them in to be there, to be present at the workshop and say, okay, here, these are the people who gave the stuff, and let them talk about what it meant to them. And I think they appreciated the fact they were invited. So as I said, I think it's just curating that and convincing them. Also, I mean, just showing what you do. I mean, it does happen sometimes that people approach us and say, "Oh, I have this very interesting stuff. Do you want it?" And then we start a conversation, but it doesn't necessarily go anywhere. They lose interest, or they have other options, and so it's not an automatic thing, right? And ultimately, we don't want to coerce anyone into giving us their stuff. We want people to be happy and want people to be proud, ultimately, that they're preserving their family heritage with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Interesting. And another question from Ali. What distinguishes a family archives from an institution?
Ah,
Institutional.
well, I mean, that sort of brings us back to the MENA archive, right? I mean, is that institutional or is it family? I think you can quibble about that. You could argue that the MENA archive is not so much of a family archive because it doesn't have a lot of these personal things like personal photographs and so on, so on and so forth. I don't know whether it's necessary to draw a dividing line there in terms of material in it. I think perhaps what sets it apart is that a family archive still has a family behind it, who are still somehow engaged with it. And that is actually true in the case of the MENA archive too. So the MENA archive, I forgot to mention, it was curated by a resident member in Alexandria up until his death in, I want to say 2020. Yeah, it's not too long ago, but at that point in time, was shortly before he passed away, the legal ownership was transitioned to a kind of a charitable foundation. So they set up a legal entity that would own the archive instead of the family. Yet the family retains a stake in it. And the daughters, who now reside in France, still keep an eye on what's going on. And it's actually an interesting case because they were the ones who actually signed the agreement for the transfer at the end. So although there are people on the ground at Alexandria who do the everyday running, it's still the family who feel it's theirs and who want to, ensure that somehow the continuity of the archive is being preserved. I think that's perhaps the one distinction that sets the family archive apart from the institutional one. That there's a kind of a personal and perhaps even emotional interest.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting. Thanks a lot. I don't see any more questions, and I think we are running out of the time. So thank you so much, Mark, for this great.
Thank
uh,
you for having me. Thank you.
yeah, it was really
Greetings to
very
Iran and to
informative.
Oman and everywhere else in the world. It was lovely to have you all on board today.
Thank you so much. It was really informative and very, very valuable topic. Actually, you came today, you shared with us. And on behalf of Library Service to Multicultural Population Section and also MENA Division, I thank all of you for joining this great webinar and wish you a great time. Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Walid, for organizing this great webinar. Thank you so much and have a great time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mark.